Hi, and welcome back to our series on end-of-life planning. Today is the third video in our four-part series on end-of-life planning, and today we'll be discussing some of the financial changes that you might experience after losing a loved one, especially but not only in relation to losing a spouse. This presentation is brought to you through ElderWatch, a 20-plus year partnership between AARP and the Colorado Attorney General's Office. In addition to providing educational materials and presentations to Coloradans 50 plus on the subject of financial literacy, we also have a volunteer-staffed fraud victim support helpline should you or someone you know be the victim of a scam or fraud. If you or someone you love needs this information or support following your experience of fraud or scam, give us a call at 800-222-4444, select option 2. My name is Jessica Zawatsky, and I am the Program Specialist for ElderWatch Colorado. As I mentioned previously, this is the third in our four-part series on end-of-life planning. The first episode in this series covered some of the things that you can prepare in advance when it comes to end-of-life planning to reduce that burden and the list of responsibilities on your family member after you've passed. After that, we talked about the journey after a loss, some of the things that you'll need to ensure that you do following the loss of a loved one. Today, we'll talk about financial changes after a loss that you might experience, and next time we'll talk about the stages of grief and their impact on decision making. Before we dig in today, I do want to remind all those listening that I am not here to offer financial or legal advice. Everyone's situation is very different with a lot of variables impacting situations, so definitely consult with a trained professional if you need support in those areas. This presentation is for educational purposes only. So on today's subject of potential changes you might have to your finances after losing a loved one, we will look at Social Security, budgeting impacts, downsizing considerations, debt repayment, and some of the scams that you should be wary of. During the time period after you've lost a loved one, one big change that might come to your life is that there might be more people around, at least for some time. This might mean someone helping with chores, groceries, things like that, that will impact your budget in the immediate. Your income may also be interrupted, especially if the estate of your loved one needs to go through the probate process. You may also find yourself with a large sum of money all at once, and you'll need to resist the urge to spend it right away or distribute it immediately to help friends, family, loved ones who ask you for a handout. This is important because that large sum of money that comes in all at once might be important for supplementing your income as time goes on, so it should definitely be protected. So first, let's talk about Social Security impact after a loved one has passed away. And first I want to say you cannot report a death or apply for survivor benefits, which we'll get into in a second, with Social Security's online platform. If you are using a funeral home, they will often report the death to the Social Security Administration, but if you need to report the death or apply for those survivor benefits, you'll need to call them, and that number is listed in that second bullet on the list. It is 1-800-772-1213 or 1-800-325-0778. If the deceased was receiving Social Security benefits, you must return the benefit received for the month of death and any later months. For example, if the person passed in July, you must return the benefits paid in August. For funds received by direct deposit, you should contact your bank or financial institution and request that any funds received for the month of death or later be returned to the Social Security Administration. Benefits received by check must be returned as soon as possible, and do not cash any checks received for the month in which the person passes or the months following. When it comes to survivor benefits, the first one we'll talk about is the one-time survivor's benefit. So a surviving spouse may be entitled to a one-time $255 survivor's benefit, even if they were divorced from the deceased. If there is no surviving spouse, the payment is made to a child who is eligible for benefits on the deceased's record in the month of death. You may also be eligible for additional survivor benefits and should explore your specific situation. Generally, when a spouse passes, if both members were collecting Social Security, the lower of the two Social Security benefits will drop away and the higher will remain. The link to Social Security as it relates to death is that last link in this slide, the last bullet point. Definitely a lot of good information there. And again, as a reminder, everyone's situation is different. There's other implications you might want to think about as well, such as if you have not retired yet, it might make sense to now delay your retirement. But lots of information to check out and consider before making any decisions. When a loved one passes, your income and expenses will likely change. It's difficult to say by how much, but another consideration that you should take into account is that if your loved one was in charge of managing the household's finances and budgeting, this will now fall onto your plate. We've highlighted some of the changes that you might experience related to income for Social Security, but another change might come regarding retirement accounts. If the deceased had a retirement account, some of them have survivor benefits, but the survivor benefit on the deceased's retirement account may result in a change of income for you, or in some cases, retirement accounts will not have a survivor benefit at all, which will cause that income stream to stop. On your insurance payments, if your spouse was a beneficiary on your insurance, your rates may change or come down. We mentioned before, but if you have not retired when your loved one has passed away, you may want to consider delaying your retirement. Depending on your situation, waiting might result in a higher monthly benefit to you in the end. Figuring out what your new monthly income and expenses are will help you to budget and reduce some of the fallout and difficulty that may result from that change in income. If you and your loved one lives together, their passing may lead you to consider downsizing your living space. There are many things that you should take into consideration as you make this decision. Does staying in this home remind you of pleasant memories and the love you and your loved one shared, or is it triggering and preventing you from moving on? Now that your loved one is gone, are you able to physically take over their share of the household labor? Do you have the time and energy to do the work that was previously taken care of by two individuals, but will now potentially all fall onto your plate? Are there any safety concerns that might prompt you to leave, such as stairs or potential isolation? Are there safety concerns that might pop up, say, in 5, 10, or 15 years out? If so, it might make sense to move now when you are still able to, versus years later when it might be more physically and logistically difficult. This list of considerations is not at all exhaustive, but these are some of the important questions you should consider in potentially downsizing. The last bullet in the house section of this slide contains some questions that you can ask yourself to make the decision of whether to downsize your living space or stay where you are. Sunshine Homes may also be a good resource if you would like to stay in your home but are concerned about the financial aspect of doing so, or are concerned about isolation, loneliness, or the increase in your chore load. Sunshine Homes Colorado is a nonprofit organization assisting people above the age of 55 to stay in their homes by safely matching them with someone seeking housing. Home sharing creates a mutually beneficial relationship, exchanging supportive services like lawn mowing or household chores, and companionship in exchange for affordable rent. Their website is listed below. Now, when it comes to possessions, you might feel incredibly overwhelmed, and that's natural. Remember, it took a lifetime to gather these items, so you shouldn't try to get rid of everything in one day. You should also wait until the will has been located and entered the probate process if necessary to ensure that you don't get rid of any items that were willed to others. One thing that you should definitely make sure you do when you're ready is to shred important papers that may be mixed in with your loved one's possessions. Check out Stop Fraud Colorado to see if there are any shredding events coming to your community. If you've been part of some of our other videos, you've heard me say that you should wait when it comes to repaying the debt of the deceased. One important question that you'll have to find the answer to is, are you, the survivor, responsible for paying the debt? And the answer to this depends. But if you are not a co-owner on the debt, the answer is probably no, you're not responsible for paying it off. If there is no money or property left in an estate, or if the estate can't pay, then the debt generally goes unpaid. But in most cases, debts will be repaid from the estate. This process is state specific, and in Colorado, generally, your debts will be paid before your loved ones are paid from your estate. Unfortunately, death is a target for scammers. Unlike other topics, it's one that we rarely talk about or deal with. So when it does happen, there's a lot of novel moving pieces that might overwhelm us in a time of increased emotional vulnerability, making us more susceptible to scams. Additionally, when someone passes, there's generally a lot of money involved in terms of paying for services as well as the estate distribution. Survivors experience many life changes and will likely be interacting with new people for the first time that they may not know very well, which makes it easier for scammers to masquerade as someone else. We have heard here on the helpline of scammers pretending to be, for example, a funeral home, saying that they did not receive all of the payment that they should have, when in actuality, the real funeral home did, and the scammer is just trying to capitalize on what is already a very difficult and potentially very expensive time in the victim's life. Additionally, on top of all of these other reasons that death is a target for scammers, there is generally less attention paid to the deceased's accounts than there were when the deceased was alive, which makes it more likely that fraud will slip under the radar. And then lastly, there is a lot of public information in the world tied to someone passing, such as the obituary, people's social media posts, and death and funeral announcements. Since there will be more people around, it may also be easier for scammers to find a way in, and it may be easier for scammers to find information since many people are now involved in this one person's passing. Identity theft is one of the biggest scams that we experience tied to death here on the helpline. There are over 2 million cases of identity theft per year involving the deceased. Scammers can easily obtain information from obituaries, death certificates, social media posts, and elsewhere online. As mentioned previously, because the deceased is no longer checking their credit or able to report fraud, another individual has to be paying attention on behalf of the deceased at an already difficult and overwhelming time, which means that it might be more likely that a fraudulent purchase will slip under the radar because it's not being monitored. The account is not being monitored as vigilantly as it was before. Additionally, financial institutions are not always made immediately aware of a deceased member. If you joined us last lesson, you learned that there are many steps that occur after an individual passes away, and contacting financial institutions is likely not the first thing that you will take care of, nor necessarily should it be, though it is very, very, very important that you do get it taken care of. The lapse in time between when your loved one passes and when you notify financial institutions is a perfect time for scammers to quickly and easily take advantage of the deceased's account, as no one is monitoring the account in that period. Anyone can fall victim to fraud or a scam, but as we always say on the helpline, if you can spot a scam, you can stop a scam. Some ways to deter identity theft specifically include shortening the obituary. Do not include birthday, mother's maiden name, or other personal information. Additionally, consider not including information about the day and time of service, as criminals may use this time knowing that a house will be empty, and then they might come try to steal things or otherwise engage in criminal activity. Similarly, if you do end up posting that information, try to get somebody to watch the house in that time frame so that you know it's safe and secure. Protecting the death certificate is an important measure to fight against fraud, scams, and identity theft. Don't give this out to anyone who does not need it, including by email or photocopy. Notifying Social Security and the DMV as soon as possible helps to prevent fraud and identity theft, as well as notifying the credit bureaus, all three of them. Once you do the latter, notifying the credit bureaus, you should check back about a month later to make sure no fraudulent activity has occurred, make sure that no lines of credit were opened under the deceased's name. Lastly, notifying financial institutions puts another set of eyes on an account, raising suspicion if a transaction on the deceased's account occurs. Given the deceptive tricks of scammers, it is important to share information with friends and family wisely, as scammers may also try to get in by going through them. Identity theft is not the only type of scam that targets the deceased and their survivors. Scammers can and will figure out that you might be the loved one that's responsible for outstanding bills, or that your loved one has outstanding debt. Knowing this, they may masquerade as a debt collector, demanding payment and using scare tactics at a time when you are likely already emotionally vulnerable. To protect yourself from these scammers, never make a payment or give personal information over the phone. Ask for the name of the representative calling, their ID number, and the company name. Once you have these, do some homework to see if the details match up. For example, if the scammer is calling you from one number saying they are a debt collecting agency, and you search for the name of the agency they are working with and see that the phone number is completely wrong, it may be a scam. To protect yourself and your loved one's estate, get legal advice before paying any major debt on behalf of the deceased. And remember, you may not be responsible for paying any debts at all, so make sure that you remain vigilant. In general, major life events can make people more susceptible to becoming the victim of a scam. Though certain scams, such as obituary-related and debt collection scams to the account of the deceased, are more common once someone has passed away, you may also be increasingly vulnerable to other types of scams. Always make sure to protect your personal information as well as the personal information of the deceased, and be alert for red flags of common scams, such as IRS scams, tech support scams, sweepstakes, phishing, and online dating. Thanks for joining me today. In addition to learning about the financial changes that might follow losing your loved one, we've also discussed a number of resources that may be helpful to you. First is the ElderWatch helpline, where you can find information and support should you or someone you know experience fraud or a scam. You can call us at 800-222-4444, select option 2. Additionally, the next resource is Stop Fraud Colorado, a resource designed to educate the public about how to spot scams and fraud. Next, I've listed the Social Security Administration's reference and informational page regarding death and those benefits we discussed earlier. If you are considering downsizing, after the Social Security tab, I have listed a guide titled Making Housing Decisions After Losing a Spouse or Partner, which may help you determine whether you should downsize and move or stay in your current home. Lastly, I've listed the link for Sunshine Homes. This resource allows you to open your home to an individual looking for housing in exchange for their help with household chores and rent. In addition to those resources, which we've already talked about, I have a couple more. The first is called Am I Responsible for My Spouse's Debts After They Die? And this resource is brought to you by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Next, I have listed AARP's Money Map. This free tool can help you to create a step-by-step action plan for better financial health by helping you to manage unplanned expenses, set a budget, manage debt, and grow your savings. Next time, we'll cover the stages of grief and the ways in which they can impact our decision-making. From ElderWatch Colorado, my name is Jessica Zawadzki. Thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you again next time.